Hello, this is Lars Westerner, and we shall ask a question. Is Lauren Southern a Marxist now? Because around 2 weeks ago she posted a video, a conservative critique of capitalism, where she actually espouses a very Marxist, anti-capitalist pseudo-critique of the best economic system in the world. I haven't actually seen this video, so we will go through this video argument by argument and try to refute her. We must also note that Lauren Southern is a notorious grifter. She is an unapologetic grifter who used to be a libertarian, then became an anti-social justice warrior. Then she jumped on the alt-right wagon, she even became an identitarian, and now she seems to be a conservative after her return to the YouTube scene. But in fact, this woman is completely devoid of any original thoughts, so probably this conservative critique of capitalism is something she looked up in some Marxist or German historical school writings, although I doubt she even reads books. So let's get to it.
People who are here for the first 10 seconds of the video to leave a dislike and an angry response calling me a communist before even watching it. And goodbye. All right, now that that's out of the way, comrades, working men and working women, collective farmers, brothers and sisters, guerrillas, we must fight for the socialist revolution. Fight to the end, until the complete victory of the proletariat and the overthrow of the international bourgeoisie. Long live the worldwide social... Seriously, people, you do not have to join the Red Army to recognize that capitalism has some problems.
Really? Let's see, what kind of problems do you see in capitalism?
You can even love it and realize this. But the truth is, one could create the greatest system in the universe, but as soon as you insert humans, said system will have issues.
First of all, we must make clear that capitalism is a socio-economic system where private property rights are respected, they are completely inviolable, you cannot violate private property rights without a punishment, and there is a security of contracts, so you can make a contract, even a 10-year contract, and this contract will be secure, so there are institutions in place which will secure contracts. And also capitalism relies on free exchange of goods, services, capital, so there is no intervention in between two parties, two people or two organizations exchanging stuff between themselves, voluntary exchange. So this is what capitalism is, nothing more, nothing less. And as you can see, no country in the history of humanity ever had pure capitalism. Capitalism is an unknown ideal, as Ayn Rand would say. So let's go.
Check out the Garden of Eden. We suck. Especially when we were given the freedom to suck. I'm not sure when exactly this Republican worship of capitalism began, but it is a problem.
Really? Republicans worship capitalism since when? Republicans are the greatest enemies of capitalism because they give capitalism a bad name. They only worship capitalism perhaps in words, but not in deeds, as you can clearly see in the performance of Republican-led Congress in the last 50 years.
And it needs to stop. Capitalism is just a system of economics that is not a god, it's not a moral system, and it's not going to save us.
Yes, it's a system of economics, so everything apart from economics and perhaps some basic fundamentals of law are not capitalism.
And in fact, in its current highly toxic form, has arguably been the downfall of both traditionalism and conservatism in...
LOL, what? LOL? What is traditionalism? Can you define it even? Highly toxic form of capitalism? In America, there is no capitalism. The only toxic form we have in America is statism. That is a highly regulated, hampered market economy. It is not capitalism.
In many ways. and coincidentally is the most powerful weapon currently used by radical socialist activists who seemingly have given up the class war in favor of winning the culture war.
Yeah, what does it have to do with capitalism? That those socialist activists are not dying of hunger because this hampered market economy can still supply them with food?
Hand in hand with big corporations.
Yeah, corporations, the creatures of the state, currently.
So let's jump right into it and go through the three main problems I have here and why.
You have problems. Well, I doubt that you even came up with these objections by yourself.
1. The amount of power corporations have is too damn high.
Corporations don't have power. Corporations are economic entities and not political entities. They don't have power. They can lobby, of course, but they can only lobby because government has too much power. So corporations profit from lobbying certain political groups in order to gain subsidies or privileges from the government. If government wasn't so damn strong, so damned unlimited, then corporations would not lobby.
I have a lot in common with libertarians. I ran for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, you had a lot of in common with libertarians, but you don't have any more.
Generally want to be left alone and not have the foot of the state constantly on my throat. However, where I tend to part ways with my libertarian friends is I think there are significantly more threats to our freedoms than just the state, such as the many violent, non-government authoritarian criminals and foreign...
Oh God. I think I'm going to turn on the subtitles. Non-government authoritarian criminals. You mean what? You mean like what? You mean Antifa? You mean BLM? They can only exist and act because government refused to defend our individual rights against them.
Terrorist groups that exist. All people I don't particularly want entering my country or running around freely. Libertarians will often disagree with me and respond by saying, sure, Lauren, violent people exist, but they are just not as big a threat as the all-powerful state is to our freedoms.
Yes, definitely so. If the all-powerful state actually carried out its basic role to protect us from non-state actors, that is, domestic criminals and international criminals like terrorists, then we wouldn't have any objections, right?
Therefore, no matter the potential benefits of the state in stopping or reducing other evils, it must be abolished or at least severely reduced.
Yes, it must be reduced to its basic function. Protection of individual rights. Nothing more, nothing less.
Because they are the bigger problem, which fair enough. Deal with the greatest threat to freedoms first.
It is not non-government actors and not terrorists who committed the most mass murders in the 20th century and who commit those murders in third world authoritarian countries.
The only problem here, though, is that the government is no longer the 800-pound gorilla. It's more like an organ grinder's monkey dancing to corporate music.
It is still an 800-ton Leviathan.
Western governments are largely controlled by corporate lobbying pressure, campaign donations, and now even censorship of politicians.
Governments are controlled by the electorate, mostly. People have free will, and they simply elect politicians they think they deserve. And politics is only a downstream from culture, as you should have known. So it is the culture which defines what the politics is currently and, for example, what corporations are doing.
Once would have thought were more powerful than said corporations. And the worst part about the corporations having this power is we didn't elect them. And no, we didn't vote for them with our dollar either.
You have all the power against corporations if you wish to. You just need to buy the stock. You can boycott them. You can make them lose revenue. Corporations are actually much easier to influence than politicians, because corporations must obey the market and politicians do not. Corporations, if they do not yield to the market pressure, they wither and die. while politicians, well, they can use force to extract money from you through taxes. And you can only choose politicians every 4 years or every 2 years in case of Congress elections, while corporations actually have to be aware of their electoral base, the consumers, every day.
I'm sure a lot of us would much rather go to our local shops and hire our neighbors for jobs over some faceless, nameless corporation, but unfortunately it's becoming near impossible to compete with global monopolies utilizing slave labor.
What? Monopolies? There are no monopolies, except those which were granted by governments. Governments are the ultimate monopolies. Corporations are not monopolies. You are not forced to use YouTube, you are not forced to use Google. There are many alternatives. And in time, you will actually see those corporations, those services you call monopolies, crumble or at least yield to market pressure. Just give them time.
To drive down prices, well, we have to adhere to reasonable...
Well, when it comes to slave labor, we can only think about China, communist China. There definitely is slave labor there, but not in significant amount to influence actually the prices on the products of corporations, of American corporations. So I don't know what you actually mean here.
Local labor laws, not to mention all the government grants, tax cuts, and favoritism for big business elites.
Is that the fault of corporations or is that the fault of big government? Huh? What does it have to do with capitalism? This is corporatism, so this is a page from a Mussolini fascist handbook.
It is simply not possible to compete, which is tragic for...
It is possible to compete. You just need to come up with a brilliant idea and you can easily compete and make bucks, big bucks. There's nothing stopping you.
Hardworking small businesses and medium businesses, which I and I'm sure many of you really support.
Small and medium businesses, if they come up with something really ingenious, they become big businesses. But if they don't, they remain small and medium, so not very effective at supporting mass consumers.
Now I know what you're thinking. I know what you are all thinking. Lauren, this is not real capitalism
Yeah.
we're talking about. This is crony capitalism.
Yeah.
And you'd be absolutely right. But here's the kicker. Real capitalism has never been tried.
Yeah, because people like you have always denigrated capitalism, profit-making, interest rates, banking, finance, corporations. This is because of people like you, the Marxists and the conservatives.
Just like how real communism has never been tried.
Because real communism cannot be tried because it leads to destruction of society, while real capitalism can be easily tried, and in countries like Hong Kong or Singapore or 19th century United States after the Civil War, capitalism was much more pure and much more better for society.
Both of these theories and systems on a large scale are ahistorical constructs. We have never lived in a world where millions of people have had to share with each other the way a family does. And we have never lived in a world where everyone buys and sells from each other with no restrictions or aggression from anyone else.
Really? But we were very close. And still, in Hong Kong, before China decided to take over, it was still possible to be completely unobstructed by government in many fields and sectors.
So if we want to deal with reality, what we have to examine is how capitalism has actually worked in history. And to my...
What do you actually know about history? I have a degree in economics and economic history. And you didn't even finish political science studies.
Libertarians, a little side note, if you need to mentally put the word crony in front of capitalism for the rest of this talk to get through it, that's perfectly fine.
So you are basically critiquing not capitalism, but a mixed economy with heavily regulated interventionist state and a huge welfare state. This is the case with Canada, this is the case with United States, this is the case with Western Europe. So what the hell are you trying to put forward here?
Like I said, you're not wrong, but I'm speaking to the system in place today that Republicans often defend as capitalism.
Well, perhaps Republicans defend this mixed economy as capitalism, but Republicans are sellouts.
And history tells us that this system can absolutely lead to brutal, authoritarian, and freedom-threatening results.
Really? Well, if you increase statism, it will. But if you decrease statism and free up economy, you will not get brutal authoritarian results. You just need to limit the government to its constitutional prerogatives, that is the protection of individual rights.
As it is quickly doing so today. Corporations have the power to politically manipulate populations, to deny us our speech, and even to control our thoughts and feelings through
Really? Aren't politicians doing that already?
algorithms. That is terrifying. And despite this, you still have Republicans out here defending it as just a private company. And another peep you may...
So what? There are also Republicans who don't defend the decisions made by private corporations, and you are free to criticize them. You are free to criticize them, you are free to sell their stock, you are free to not use their products and not get influenced by them. Millions of people do.
hear from them in defense of our corporate overlords is, well,
They are not your overlords. Politicians are your overlords.
at least they can't throw you in jail. At least they won't put you against a
Yeah,
firing wall or
yeah.
start wars. Yeah, sorry. That just doesn't quite line up with history either. I could do a whole video on private war profiteering.
What? What? This woman is completely nuts.
And massive companies and corporations like the Dutch East India Company, not
This was not capitalism, and Dutch East India Company actually wasn't that bad. It was English East India Company, which was a corporation in its mercantilist form, that is an entity granted monopoly by the government, by the royal government of England. So it wasn't capitalism, it was mercantilism.
only kept and sold slaves, but had private militaries larger than entire countries' militaries, and eventually became so powerful they could invade and become the acting government in areas in which they had business interests.
Because they were granted monopolies by the state.
To pretend that if we just abolished the government, none of these corporations would
We don't want to abolish government, we need to limit the government to its basic functions, protection of individual rights.
ever even think to oppress us, to fill that power vacuum and take away our liberties, is madness.
How is corporation going to take away your liberties? Only government can do that. Corporations don't have guns, unless they are granted this privilege by government.
In fact, there is already legislation being proposed to
Yeah, that would be great.
allow Nevada tech companies to form their own governments in cities.
Yes.
So people, if you are skeptical of and you don't like big government, you really should be just as worried about big corporations,
Corporations don't have guns, as I said.
because they don't want to uphold systems which made them wealthy, as those very systems may allow for their replacement and failure.
Yes, that's actually correct. That's actually correct. That's why we need to keep government small and limited, so government cannot grant privileges to corporations, cannot regulate corporations, because big established corporations use this power of government to lobby for regulations which will stifle their up-to-be competitors. This is a way corporations use government, lobby government for greater regulations in the economy to stifle competition.
And thus, they want to become your government and eliminate competition and question.
Yes.
And I fear that these mega corporations are getting very close to that. So instead of daddy government on our throats, we'll just have, Google Soldiers TM putting us up against firing walls for illegally downloading Gab or Parler to their devices and sharing our Netflix account with more than 10 friends.
You are insane. You are totally insane.
But let's move on, because this second one is a far more important point, and
No.
that is capitalism's destruction of community and culture.
Oh God.
I often see many on the right lamenting the loss of old traditional architecture, community, family, and art, and yet at the same time proposing capitalism as a solution. It's not. Not even a little bit. Capitalism has no incentive to preserve our culture or communities.
Capitalism isn't a person. Capitalism isn't an entity, so it cannot have incentives. People should have incentive or should not have incentive to preserve or not preserve culture or communities. It depends completely on those people in question.
And in fact, I'd argue has negatively impacted families.
Oh, really?
I think
Wasn't it the welfare state which impacted negatively families? Wasn't it the Great Society program of 1960s which introduced welfare state into the United States, which negatively impacted families?
where this confusion comes in is some people observe that Marxism works in opposition to capitalism and to deconstruct the nuclear family, and assume, therefore, capitalism must be working to oppose Marxism and to support the family. But capitalism is not Marxism's counter. It came about before Marxism and is therefore indifferent to it. It's simply an alternate system. And while that system can certainly bolster some people's family lives and wealth and material goods, capitalism only moderates for the markets and not for the souls and well-being
Exactly, so what the hell are you implying?
of its workers. There is a reason defenders of capitalism talk about how people can't eat in communist societies, because capitalism is really, really good at creating surpluses of goods for physical needs. But does it serve, I don't know, your safety needs?
Of course it does. Under capitalism, you are much more safer from climate catastrophes, environmental catastrophes, simple burglaries, from physical assault.
Not really. Your financial security can be wiped away any minute.
Really? So, in pre-capitalistic times, financial security of a subsistence farmer could be wiped away any minute their harvest failed. Have you ever thought about it?
By the stock market.
You are not forced to invest in a stock market. Under capitalism, where there are no central banks and banking is free, you can allocate your savings in either gold or in bank deposits, and these are, well, the safest option in a physical world you can get, unless someone breaks into the safe and steals your gold.
Does it serve needs relating to love and belonging?
Well, it surely does. You can buy cheaply a diamond ring to give to your loved one. You can take her on a dinner. You can take her to cinema. You can take her for a trip. You can take her for a ride. All the things you couldn't do in pre-capitalistic times or in socialism.
No, because having a wife or a husband, and definitely kids, is a drain on your productivity and resources.
Really? Well, in pre-capitalistic times, actually, people, when they had too many kids, the subsistence farmers, and couldn't feed them, they actually gave the kids away into institutions which then forced labored those kids into working in cottage industries. This is what happened in pre-capitalistic England in the 18th century. And you are bragging here about what the hell are you talking about? This is not a fault of capitalism that having kids and trying to provide them with great material comfort drains your resources.
And anyway, in this culture, apparently it's irrational to limit yourself to just one person. Might as well just use Tinder and count yourself lucky to live in a free society, you prude. Does it serve needs related to esteem? Does anyone feel esteemed in an assembly line or in a job where...
Well, definitely you feel much more esteemed in an assembly line where you are actually making much more than on the farm or in a cottage industry, where you had to go for weeks without decent food, for instance.
where their boss treats them like they should be grateful the company has room in the budget for free coffee.
Well, you can always increase your skills and become a boss yourself. What's stopping you?
Does it serve needs relating to self-actualization? I don't know. You try self-actualizing in a gig economy, or in a world where you can lose your job the instant you self-actualize in a way that Twitter doesn't like.
You mix two different aspects. Actually, it is the gig economy which make you manage your time as you wish to. If you don't like working 9 to 5, you are basically taking a risk and become a self-employed entrepreneur. Doesn't it count as self-actualization? But the other aspect, the second aspect you mentioned, the cancel culture, is not a feature of capitalism. It is a feature of the toxic culture which was made possible by socialism and actually by expanding welfare state.
Also, on a side note, Marxism may have told women that being wives and mothers was shameful, but it was capitalism that broadcast that message.
No, capitalism doesn't broadcast message. It is the toxic culture of the new left which broadcasted this message.
So that all those women would enter the workforce and drive down the wages of their husbands and sons.
Lol, what? You don't know nothing about economics. Jesus Christ. Do you know why so many women entered workforce in the 1980s? This was because the increase in the cost of living brought about by socialism of the 1960s and 70s in the US, when not only taxes rose, but inflation went skyrocketed because of social spending, welfare spending, and basically by US involvement in Vietnam War, which increased government spending. This increased inflation and the rise in the cost of living throughout the 1970s, and this has never been reversed. So throughout the 1980s, women were actually forced to get into the job market to complement their family's income.
Sons, seriously, can we really say that it's all just government systems that have ruined our happiness? Or perhaps could some of us admit our work-life addiction to media, obsession with pursuing the next shiny product, the constant demands that we buy things to look a certain way, feel a certain way, watch this, buy that, play that, drink this, eat that? Could it perhaps be this mass consumerism and work-life imbalance that has also ripped us from our family, community, and loved ones? And
is it a fault of capitalism, or is it a fault of, for instance, of artificially low interest rates? Mass consumerism is basically the result of artificially low interest rates, which make savings unattractive. So people basically spend money, take credit, take loans, and spend all these additional fiat money for material goods, because material goods don't depreciate so fast as money does under central banking systems. Jesus Christ, this woman has no logic whatsoever.
Ourselves, in many ways as well. What Hannah Arendt called the vita activa, a state where we must always be busy, never present, and always consuming.
Is that a bad thing? You are not forced to do that. You can retire in the country, buy a plot of land, and just live a happy life there. Why won't you? Why won't you?
Soul destroying. And even if we move on to other factors leading to cultural decay, such as mass immigration with no assimilation, that too has largely been pushed and supported by corporations.
Well, that's partly true. Corporations look for cheap labor, but those migrants actually don't work so much. Those mass migrants actually abuse the welfare state, and they are not really contributing to the workforce in any shape, way, or form.
Looking for cheap labor. As for old architecture, the utility of a building being nice relative to its price just doesn't add up. And don't tell me there's not a demand for beautiful buildings when people...
Capitalism creates very beautiful buildings which do not rely on old, so-called traditional schemes or schematics, but it is only government regulation which stops architects and developers from creating really beautiful architecture.
People are flying halfway across the world just to take pictures with them. The problem is that the demand clearly doesn't lead to enough profit. Visual joy of the citizenry in daily life is not a business.
Oh, Jesus.
This is in large part why the left have won the culture war.
No, this is not the reason. The left won the culture war because they set on a path to actually win this culture war many decades ago.
They didn't care that their arts degrees weren't particularly profitable, they just wanted to create art. And sure, I'm conceding ground to progressives in some regard, but I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that you can eat an art degree or that it was the arts that doubled our average lifespan. That was absolutely innovation pushed by commercial interests and capitalism. But the question still arises, what is the point of a long lifespan if increasingly people aren't wanting to live said life?
Oh, Jesus. Did you think people under socialism wanted to live long lives in this dreaded misery? The reason people kill themselves is not the fault of capitalism, it is the fault of culture. Culture and culture alone. Capitalism doesn't have anything to do with this degenerate culture. Capitalism is only an economic system, while what influences culture are completely different things.
Ultimately, we cannot understate how consumerism makes surviving insultingly easy, but we must also acknowledge it makes living insultingly hard.
Really? Today, we have basically unlimited opportunities to live our lives, which we have had not before. So what the hell are you talking about? 20 years ago, you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing now. Grifting. You wouldn't be able to grift that hard. 20 years ago, there wouldn't be so many opportunities, and it was only 20 years ago, so many opportunities to live a fulfilling, happy life. If people can't live fulfilling, happy lives, it is not a problem of capitalism, which of course is very limited today. Despite that, this is a problem of how they were raised, this is the problem of leftism, of the cultural leftism today, and this is the problem with statism, which makes it hard for people, for instance, to grasp the opportunities when they show up.
Now, the last one here, number 3. Capitalism is indifferent to morality.
Of course, because capitalism is an economic system, and it has nothing to do with being different or indifferent to morality. But capitalism relies on a particular moral precepts, that is, that violation of property rights is wrong, violation of individual rights is wrong, that stealing is wrong, that aggression, initiation of aggression is wrong. So it relies on these particular precepts.
Capitalism is not a conservative view of the world. It's not a political view at all, really. It's simply a tool which sways towards the highest bidder.
Lol, what?
If you live in a culture that is deeply sickened, the products that are both created and sold will sicken with it.
That's true.
They won't save it. They won't pull you out of your moral darkness. Capitalism just amplifies what we as humans desire in our hearts, which is why it has done very wonderful things, worthy of praise. But if you are a nation that has lost morality, if you are a nation that has lost God, capitalism just becomes the devil's playground.
So you think that what? That we should limit capitalism even more so that people won't buy porn?
Go ahead, ignore your family and friends so you can work to fund your alcoholism, I don't know, spend all night feeding your porn addiction and buying your way past a girl's modesty, pay for followers to feed your narcissism, why don't you? And go ahead.
Said the damned grifter. You are the most narcissistic, grifting people on the YouTube. And you dare to lecture us and preach to us about morality?
Consume the cheapest product provided by men and women only held to their desks by the factory suicide nets, preventing them from jumping to their own death.
That's not capitalism.
I'm sorry, but there is a reason that even the most stringent conservatives like Sir Roger Scruton often describe themselves as reluctant capitalists.
Because they are people devoid of any economic thinking. They cannot differentiate between socio-economic systems and cultural institutions.
Because modern capitalism is a deeply sick system.
No, the sickness here is the culture created in part by modern leftism.
And progressives are not wrong to call that out. If you
Lol, what?
can't acknowledge where your opponents are correct, you cannot argue with them on where they are wrong.
Progressives brought about the degeneracy. Progressives brought about the mixed economy we have now, the welfare state, which makes degeneracy possible, the welfare state, which makes us all miserable, and only those small slivers of capitalism in the startup companies, in the entrepreneurial spirit of American business, is what keeps the world going.
You can't even begin to explain to them that this is crony capitalism. You can't even begin to argue that it's a user issue and application rather than the system itself, without acknowledging that there is an issue in the first place. Truth is not found in political absolutes. It's not found in platitudes either. As one of my most respected mentors and Professor Ron Dart always reminds me, truth is often found in the tension. That is to say, not absolutes, nor even the center, but constantly questioning and challenging ourselves and our beliefs. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, some of you may be itching to call me a socialist for publishing this.
No, I will call you a conservative, which is even a worse insult.
But consider that you're watching this video on YouTube. Literally any minute, with no warning, YouTube could alter its terms of service to include a provision that lets them ban this video, and then do it. How does this make them any better than countries who censor political dissidents?
Because you can upload this video to another platform.
My banning from the UK cut me off from speaking face-to-face with 68 million people, potentially.
And how is that the fault of capitalism?
Even if I had a primetime slot at the BBC and attracted the entire viewership of the UK, I still wouldn't get a fraction of the influence and reach that's available on YouTube. YouTube YouTube gets 8.6 billion monthly visits worldwide. Literally more engagement than there are people on planet Earth.
But you are not entitled to use its platform if it doesn't want you on it. Can't you understand that? Just as I don't want you in my home preaching to me about capitalism or morality.
Their daily views are in the billions, and YouTube can cut you off from that audience anytime it likes.
Yes, it can. So what? You are not entitled to an audience. You narcissistic grifter.
With no warning or explanation. And because of the power of its lobbying, there is currently no chance to fix that problem. And if you complain about that massive, unaccountable, super governmental power over worldwide speech, you get accused of supporting literal centralized planning of all resources in society by some Republicans, as if there is no middle ground between, hey, I think corporations have gone a bit far, and submitting yourself to Big Brother.
Logic is not very strong with this one.
This is why I say this to any in my audience currently itching to call me a socialist.
You don't deserve to be called socialist.
Keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Now, do I have a solution for this? Great question. No.
Yes, I have a solution for you. Delete your channel.
I got nothing. Sorry, guys. But to be fair, this is probably why we've let things get so whack. Because all of our solutions to these problems with capitalism throughout history have...
No, there are no problems with capitalism. The problem with capitalism is that we have so little of it.
...created much bigger problems for us than the initial one we were trying to solve, including the death and torment of millions. So I guess I can see why people are a bit hesitant to brainstorm on this one, but I would rather honestly speak about the flaws in capitalism with my head held high than pretend it's perfect by burying my head in the sand, I guess. And we can't really ignore these problems forever, as the more we pretend they don't exist, the more people will turn to radical solutions rather than reasonable healing.
Yes, I want a radical solution. Let us bring back capitalism instead of conserving this welfare state madness.
But yeah, I just wanted to start a conversation there, and I'm glad I got that off my chest, comrades. And for those of you who really disagreed with me and stuck around to the end of this video, really respect that and appreciate that. And to those of you who enjoyed all of this video and agree with me, please consider liking and sharing it and checking out my subscribe star.
Damn grifter. No, I won't check out your subscribe star. No more money for you.